Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I thought I would dip my toe into the kind of low heat debate that's been going on BookTube about objectivity versus subjectivity in book reviewing. I believe this round was started by a channel run by a man named Michael Nip. Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space responded. I believe Michael Nip said that there is no objectivity, or objectivity isn't possible in book review, and Christy Lewis says it is. Then we had Pei from the channel Attention wade into the conversation by suggesting that objectivity is in fact subjective, if I understood Pei's video correctly. And then Scott and Nell from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot also weighed in on the subject, and they introduced the topic, I think here also, of gatekeeping. And so I wanted to talk about these things, and now that all the really smart people have had their say, you know, somebody with a far more mundane way of thinking about things probably than them, I thought I'd go ahead and weigh in. And part of this I thought was brought up by me doing some editing and reviewing of my own writing and trying to view that objectively versus subjectively, to be that critic who, at least on some level, looks at something and says, well, that's just a bad sentence and this doesn't make sense, and the flow of your writing and your paragraphs doesn't make sense, and the rhythm of your words and the repetition of sentence structures, that all those things are things we need to pay attention to. And this kind of brought me to this question, and it also reminded me of what I thought was just an excellent video that Steve Donahue did several years ago, which was titled, I believe it was titled, Subjectivity and Art Appreciation. And he made that video in response to a video that a channel that no longer has videos called Words Everywhere made several years ago. So again, this is a particularly new thing. But I went back and watched Steve's video, and a lot of things about what he said I agreed with, which is unusual for Steve and I. But I just kind of want to echo those things. So I want to start off by showing you some art. I want to show you two paintings of penguins, one by my daughter at the top and one by John James Audubon at the bottom, and ask you to look at those two paintings and tell me which one is better. Now clearly, you know, the painting by John James Audubon of a penguin is clearly better. It's executed with more skill than my daughter's painting of a penguin. It's more realistic. You get a feeling for that creature actually being alive, where my daughter's picture of the penguin is relatively two-dimensional, though I think excellently rendered. And there's no doubt that Audubon's painting is a better painting of a penguin than my daughter's painting is of a penguin. That is objectively true. Skill, you know, talent, practice, intent, all clearly indicate that Audubon's painting the penguin is better than my daughter's. That doesn't mean I like Audubon's painting the penguin better than I like my daughter's. I like my daughter's much more. It's been on the refrigerator since, well, since she was small, and she's grown up and married and graduated from college now, and we still keep it there. That's how much I like that penguin picture. So there is then an ability to judge things objectively. This is the point that Steve makes, and I want to illustrate with these pictures here. And if we can say that there are objective things which prove that Audubon's painting is better than my daughter's painting of a penguin, then we can apply those standards, those objective standards can be applied to all works of art. Okay? They can be applied to art, painting, sculpture, architecture, literature, writing, books, fiction, whatever we want to apply it to. We can apply those standards, and you can create an objective rubric, more or less, of what, you know, constitutes a well-written book, a well-structured book, a book with a plot that makes sense, a book with characters that feel real, a book with characters that are, you know, more than just two-dimensional cartoonish characters. That we can say all those things about a book, and because we can say those things about a book, then it is possible to objectively review a book. That doesn't mean it's possible to objectively say this book is necessarily great and this book rendered with equal skill is not as great. That then is, to me, where subjectivity does come into the picture. And I will say, in terms of reviewing books in fiction, I think that genre fiction is much more likely to be objectively reviewed than general fiction, or as people refer to it, as literary fiction. Because genre fiction is, by definition, written to a certain standard. It is written to appeal to readers who expect to see certain things in the book, whether it's a romance or a mystery. You know, we can easily point out flaws that exist in mystery novels where, you know, where the author doesn't introduce the important, you know, clue until like 2 pages from the end, or only the detective could possibly have figured this thing out, and kind of leaving the reader out of the situation. You know, we talk about plot holes, and one of the favorite things I've seen on BookTube over the last couple of years are all the plot holes that exist in Harry Potter. I love pointing out the plot holes that exist in Star Wars, and we can say these stories are not necessarily well constructed, even though they appeal to us. And I think genre fiction lends itself to that far more than general fiction. But that doesn't mean that general fiction can't be evaluated in the same way. And this is where I get kind of closer to that idea of gatekeeping that Scott and Nell brought up in their video. Given enough experience, given enough broad enough reading, critics, whether they're paid critics or people even on BookTube or maybe people on Goodreads, critics can apply that standard rubric about plot, about character development, about proficiency in writing and rhythm, and the way the words feel in your mouth, you say them out loud, or they sound in your head if you sub-vocalize, and the way the sentences go together, and all this stuff. Critics can apply that standard, and they quite frequently do. And I think this is why, in general, we see critics agreeing about books they consider to be great. And so there isn't necessarily that kind of critical response and gatekeeping, maybe perhaps on great books, but there is, I think, critical response and gatekeeping on books that, let's say, are considered to be less than great. So to give you an example, I think that probably most people agree that Wolf Hall is a great book, that most professional critics agree that Hilary Mantel and Wolf Hall achieved greatness in writing that book. I thought the book myself was written very well and very interesting, even though I didn't particularly like it, and I would not rank it a great book, but I'm not a professional book critic. There was something about that book that goes beyond then just the objective, provable, standards that we set for fiction and writing that then appeal to people on a larger level and made most critics, professional critics, these people whose whole lives are devoted to, these people whose professional lives are devoted to evaluating fiction and literature, that resonated with them, that made them feel like that book was great and not just proficient. And there is a difference between proficiency and greatness. So what I guess in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is that we can objectively evaluate the proficiency of a book. We can only subjectively evaluate the book and its emotional appeal and how it resonates with individual readers. But even then, I think there are some things that exist in books which so resonate perhaps with the human experience that we can all, or most of us, or the vast majority of critics, can realize that those books have a kind of greatness. But those standards, and this may be where I'm touching a little bit on what Pei said in his videos, those standards that we create change over time. And I don't think it's far off to say that critics do function as gatekeepers by holding literature and fiction to standards that were in place that they absorbed when they were learning their craft, when they were doing all this reading. And those standards over time change. I'll just give the most obvious example I can think of. There was a time when the Paris Salon decided what art in Paris was and wasn't, and critics had these ideas about art. Okay, and those critics who controlled the Paris Salon, excluded the Impressionists, because they didn't think that was art. There were American art critics who labeled the work of George Bellows and what's his name, Thomas Eakin as the trash can art, or trash can school of art, because they didn't think it really rose to the standards of, you know, what they considered to be art at the time. What their objective standards for art were, that art didn't meet. But over time, our perceptions have changed. And so we do see critics, I think, oftentimes applying these kind of standards as ways of suggesting that works that may resonate with lots of people are not great works of literature because they don't meet the objective standards those critics have agreed are the objective standards. That kind of criticism is relatively common, and we begin to see, particularly when we're at that point where there's some kind of generational change taking place. And it's possible, and it seems likely, much to, I'm sure, Steve's unhappiness, that autofiction is something that's going to change standards. It's clearly already changing standards for how we evaluate fiction literature, as will, you know, people reading more diversely. The more diversely we read, the more we have to perhaps accept, and maybe, you know, if we're critic gatekeepers not, accept the idea that there are different ways to tell stories. And there are different ways in which sentences and the rhythm of sentences and the way in which language work in different cultures from different groups of people, and we may have to be able to, you know, change our objective standards for those. And whether critics of today want that to happen or not, that will in fact happen, as was true with the Paris Salon and Impressionism and all the other forms of art that have come afterwards. Anyway, there you go. There are the rambling thoughts of not the smartest person on BookTube talking about this issue. Really enjoyed everybody's video. I'll leave links to all those below, as well as to Steve's video, which is from, I think, 2018, and is just an excellent discussion of this. Unfortunately, you can't see Mark's video from Words Everywhere because it was excellent too. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and as always, thank you for watching.